Hello, welcome back to the Plaid Lad. Today I will be reviewing Ms. Marvel, as I said I would in the previous review video. Today I decided to change my format a little bit. Instead of just doing a non-spoiler review, I'll have a nice, short, non-spoiler review at the beginning for the people that haven't seen the show and want to know how it's good. And then, after this section, I can then dive deeper into the things that I have to say about the show. Alright, let's get started. Alright, the first thing that I want to do in this non-spoiler section of the review is give a basic plot summary in which I would give a nice, description of what goes on in the show without spoiling anything, of course, similar to how I did it in the Thor movie. So, this show starts off with Ms. Marvel, Kamala, somehow stumbling upon a magical bracelet that gives her strange superpowers. And then afterwards, in the first 3 episodes, she goes on to this journey of trying to figure out her powers, trying to deal with hiding them from her parents, and the classic high school hero type stuff. It's very fun in those 3 episodes, and they're the top episodes of the series. Then after a while, she starts to stumble upon some opposing forces. Some of them want to stop her, while the others are trying to get her to do something for them, but Kamala realizes that what she's doing could be dangerous and could end up doing more harm than good, and that she should go around in a more smart way. But then this group does not like that, and so they just try to get her and capture her and force her to help them do it for them. And then eventually this journey and confusion leads her to going to Pakistan in order to learn more about her culture and where her powers came from, until eventually she gets what she needs from there. There's a lot of spoilery information in that scene, which is why I'm giving so little detail. And then she goes back to Jersey. This is where it takes place, Jersey City. And then she fights the remaining foes that were back there, because one of the foes does follow her to Pakistan, and she has to fight them off. But the other foe is dealt with when she gets back. And it's a nice return. She knows what she's doing. She's finally where she needs to be, and she can be awesome. And that's the other great episode in the show. So, my basic review of this first season is, overall, this is a very great show. It is spectacular, and most of the show deserves the ratings that it gets. This is the most praised Marvel show that has come out as of yet. It's the one that's gotten the best ratings out of all of them. Yeah. But I would say that only the first 3 episodes and the last episode are the ones that are really, really good. Episode 4 is pretty good in the way that it explores its culture, but 5 is where it kind of gets confusing, and it has some of that classic mid-season editing where at some point in the road they decided to change something, and that kind of muddies the plot a little bit, And overall, just kind of makes the origins and the reasons why she has her powers really, really confusing. One thing is the group that goes after her has been very obviously edited with. In some scenes there, in one scene where one character is describing them, there's obvious ADR if you look at the scene of him talking, and then they cut to a shot where they don't show his face, and then you hear an audio that doesn't sound like it was recorded in the same room. That was clearly ADR, in which they covered up something that they didn't like previously. And then throughout, it starts a little bit in episode 3 with the wonky editing, but it's not really all that bad since it's a small point of the show, and at this point, you don't really expect much since the Force is new and you don't really know anything about them. But they do seem kind of random, and you're kind of like, huh, what's going on? Assuming that it would get explained in a good way at the end. And I guess it does, but one thing that is definitely missing is this foe, the one that follows them to Pakistan, doesn't really have clear motivations. Like, they obviously have this one motivation that of wanting to go home. They're not from here. But everything else about their characters I don't really get, you know? It would have been cool to explore maybe what it is like from where they're from, maybe like why they aren't allowed to be there anymore, and overall just their motivations, because their motivations in the end isn't just to go back home, it's to destroy everything. But I don't really get where the destroying everything comes into play. It doesn't really make any sense why they would be so ruthless in that way. And so the ending of that fight is very confusing, and you're just kind of left like, what's going on? And then they jump back to episode 6 where they come back to Jersey, and it's all great, and you barely even have any questions from the last episode because it's just, this episode is so great. Like, obviously there's still confusing bits in episode 5, but you just kind of learn to accept it and just move on, you know? It's the one bump in an otherwise really good series, and episode 6 goes back to that really good spot, which then carries on into the future Marvel stuff. And anytime that they're in Jersey or just dealing with the fun, mishaps with their powers and being a superhero is the really, really good spots of the show. And then even when they delve into the cultures and whatnot, and the family and the religion, that is very good. But when it comes down to 4 and 5, especially 5, that's when it starts to get really rushed. And honestly, those episodes were kind of for me. 4, it ended in a cliffhanger, but I kind of expected that to be a low-level episode in which you'd have a bunch of questions, and then 5 would be the one where you're like, oh, that's what happened. But then you got some really good stuff in that episode in the beginning of 5 where it's obvious that they didn't mess with it because it didn't need fixed. And then after that section, they go through and you start to realize, oh, something happened here, you know? This wasn't how it was originally written, and it's not just because you're trying to defend the bad writing. It's obvious that there are some weird editing decisions. There's some weird moments in there that feel empty. And when compared to the fact that all of the rest of the series, and this happens in some of the other Marvel shows where you have that moment where you're like, this feels empty, but the rest of the series feels really good. Why is this part empty? And most of the time, that is because, in fact, all the times that this has happened has been due to, editing and, ADR and all of that type of stuff, where they try to fix it in post. And with reshoots, and not even reshoots, they just kind of cut it into a way that makes sense. And all of the shows have this problem, But with the way that Ms. Marvel was formatted, with the fact that it's kind of set up as a mystery, where in the 5th episode, you finally are trying to have the stuff explained to you, and then to have all of the message that they originally intending kind of muddled up and confusing, kind of makes it a lot stranger. And the conclusion that they come to at the end of the series would have been so much easier if they just didn't go with that explanation, because the explanation that they reach at the end of the series is great on its own, but it would have just made a whole lot more sense if they just stuck to where they were obviously going. So overall, great show. 5th episode is a little confusing, pretty rushed, obviously. It's very obvious, but the rest of the show is absolutely spectacular, and 4 is good as long as you're not expecting anything good to come out of the episode after that. But overall, great show. Totally recommend watching it, because it's absolutely great despite that 5th episode. And all of the other episodes make up for it compared to the level of where the show is at. Like episode 1, 2, and 3, and 6, and 4 if you don't expect 5, are all top tier, really great. And then episode 5 is down here, except for the beginning part of episode 5, and you'll know what I'm talking about, because that part was obviously came from a place of honesty, It looked really good. All right, spoilers up. If you haven't watched the show, leave now. This is for people who have watched the show or want a more in-depth summary, because they're I don't want to watch these Marvel shows, and I'm really not sure. That's okay. In fact, in the future, if you ever want me to make a show about a Marvel property, maybe you have a question about something in the Marvel movies, maybe you were confused about something, you need explanation, you need a nerd to explain everything away to you. Eternals was a very confusing movie for some people, because lots of times they relied on visuals, and they kind of did it in a way where they never told you everything explicitly, and you kind of have to figure out yourself. That kind of made people confused about everything. If you have any questions similar to that, feel free to put them in the comments below, maybe even put them in the form of a question, so that way I can answer them in the future Q&A video. Alright. Spoilers ahead. Alright. I'm going to just start from the first episode and slowly go through all of the episodes until I reach the last episode, because that's how I like doing things. So, the first episode is really great. For the most part, all of these Marvel shows have really solid pilots. They work similar to how a normal TV show pilot does, where it has a closed plot in which you have a beginning, middle, and end, and you kind of get the summary of what the character is about. And they do this in all of the shows. The one that I remember feeling that way was Moon Knight, in which they both have really good pilots, where it starts from confusion and then it ends with something really cool. And the pilot is full of fun, it's high schooler. It's a little bit kind of like a high school comedy type movie, those Disney high school movies where it have the classic tropes, except it's a lot less tropey and just fun, it has some of those classic high school things, but it's not bad Disney, if you know what I mean. It's really fun, and I know some people get turned off by high school, stuff like that. I do, especially when it's dry and dull, but this stuff was really, really fun, and it wasn't formulaic, you know, like the characters obviously have like a natural chemistry with each other, and it really just brings up the vibes of the show. When the powers come in, it's really fun. It has that classic like kid training montage with superpowers. It's really fun. Kamala, she gets to show her like personality, and it really shines through in this first episode. Um, you know how in like lots of those high school shows they have the text chain and then the word bubble pops up beside them? This episode has one of those scenes, but they do it really, really great. Like they're texting, and then it interacts with a physical object in the background, in which instead of just having a text bubble pop up in the air, it lights up the thing in the background. And I found that to be really great. But the basic thing with this episode is that mysterious thing comes. A mysterious box came from a relative of theirs, in which inside of it they find a bangle. It's a little like wrist thing. Now, in the meantime, Kamala, or Ms. Marvel, the star of the show, she is going to an Avengers Con in which she wants to dress up as her favorite superhero, Captain Marvel, because she's the one that punches the Thanos' ship right out of the sky and it crashes to the ground. That is a hero. Without her, everything would have been gone for. And it has this really fun opening montage of like this animated YouTube video that's very similar in like nerdiness to like a Marvel breakdown almost, you know, where she gives a plot summary, her breakdown of what happened in Endgame, and it's just really, really cool. It I like watching those nerd videos, so it kind of hit a place at home. And the way that she does her like nerd videos is similar way to like how I like to think about Marvel. And I know that the people that I watch that do their nerd videos, they were really happy because it felt almost exactly like one of their videos. And previously, the actress for Kamala had said that she is a really big fan of the nerd channel that I watch. If you know who I'm talking about, and you've seen the interviews, then you would probably know what channel I'm talking about. But anywho, absolutely fantastic, really great. And then they deal with the high school drama. She takes her driver's test. That scene's great. They meet with her counselor. They talk about him. You get to meet the side character, Bruno, but the her like friend who kind of builds her suits and whatnot to go to Comic-Con, or in this world, Avengers Con. It's really great. They set up the show. Those just died, so it's no use having them in anymore. But they set up the show in a very nice way. They introduced the high school formula. They introduced the fun personality of the character. They introduced the superhero like confusion part of it. The parents are absolutely great in this show. Like the dad especially is absolutely like probably the best MCU dad. Like they made those Hulk costumes, and he was planning on going with her full in makeup as like a grown man to an Avengers Con. He's a great dad. And Kamala, she was just being rude in that scene. Like, all of the effort that was putting into those costumes, you know, they were fully supporting her in going to the Avengers Con. They just didn't want her to wearing a Captain Marvel outfit. And of course, the end of that episode, she goes back home. Her parents catch her. They give her a choice between being normal or choosing like power, in which she chooses power. Then in the second episode, they begin to dive deeper into the powers. She gets to do some action fighting in that one. It's great. It develops same things as the first episode, but even better. Now, I forget if it was in this episode or episode 3, but I might as well mention it now. But there's this scene where Bruno is looking into the... it happens in episode 3, but anywho, Bruno looks into the background of like the din, the jinn, the clandestines and whatnot, and she begins to and then the dad comes into the store and gets like a hostess like treat thing. It's like a jelly filled like hostess like pastry thing. And that is actually a joke from the comics, because Marvel used to be sponsored by that exact pastry, you know? In the ad, they would go in, it would inexplicably, in a very forced way, the characters would all of a sudden somehow segue to this, like, hostess, like, fruit-filled whatever, and they would be like, you know what's good after a nice day of crime fighting? This hostess fruit-filled treat. It's a completely natural fruit treat or something like that. And that was kind of a nod to how the comics used to do that, and they put a spin on it with him, instead of being like, it's so real, instead going, it's so artificial, and I love it. Which is kind of the opposite of the ad message that they had back in the day. It's one of those, it's another one of those comic book jokes that Marvel has been putting into their movies recently, like, there's this joke in Endgame and now in Thor: Love and Thunder, where they use the word flick. In Endgame, it's when Ant-Man says, flick me, in order to flick over to Tony. And then in Thor, it's when he says, you flicked too hard. That is actually a comic book joke, because if you put the word flick into an italicized comic book print, it looks like the F word. Alright, back to the second episode. So, she begins to get into a situation where she's able to meet with Kamran, the high school crush character. They kind of follow that trope, but then subvert it into the clandestines later on. So, basically, what happens is they go on they start to bond and become friends, and then eventually he was planning to somehow reveal himself to her, but eventually he does in not the best way. But anywho, at the end of the episode, he does in fact reveal himself to her, where she saves the boy from falling off of the building, and then she runs away. He crashes into the DODC, which has been chasing after her since episode 1, and now they finally have confronted her, in which the DODC is the Department of Damage Control. In the comics, they're just simply known as Damage Control. It's the group that's been in Iron Man and whatnot, but this time they're kind of different, you know? And they bring back the same guy from Spider-Man No Way Home as one of the main guys in charge of whatever division he's part of. He seems to know a lot more than he's leading on, because he somehow knew that Nick Fury was off-world, which, how would just some random employee know that? He has to have some sort of higher level than we know so far. And the fact that he was able to say that there's something familiar about Kamala's powers in the first episode, it's kind of suspicious. And so, yeah, he's kind of suspicious. But then afterwards, he goes and she goes into over the van and then gets saved by a mysterious car that drives up next to the DODC, in which then she drives in and then gets in, and then it's revealed that it is the relative that has been like forbidden in her family that was mentioned prior to then as like a person they don't like. And then she's in there with her son, which turns out to be the crush. Fortunately, the crush is not 100 years old and is in fact actually a teenager. That would have been creepy if he wasn't. Alright, episode 3. You get to learn, this is the one in which Bruno looks into the clandestines and the djinn and all of that stuff, all of that history and culture. And that is where the funny scene with the hostess fruit, whatever, I forget what it's called, comes in. And but at the beginning of the episode, they show that the bangles come from the same place that the 10 rings come from, through the flashback scene. Because in that scene, they get the bangle from a blue arm, presumably a Kree alien, and then it pans up to or at least changes the shot to a giant wide angle looking down, in which you see that the 10 ring symbol on the place that they're at, on the ground of the place that they're at. So somehow the 10 rings are connected to these bangles, and also there is a missing bangle since they only got one arm. There is a missing bangle somewhere that we haven't found yet, and it never gets found in the course of the series. So it's just left up as a mystery for the future. So, anyways, the family plot is that there is going to be a wedding with the brother character, and that they're planning that wedding during the course of this episode. You get some nice, like, cultural and religious, like, stuff in this episode, and also in the last, and also in episode 2, where they kind of go into the religion and whatnot, and that part's very fun. It's very educational, informative, and I'm just really glad that Marvel went all the way when doing the character. You know, they could have just went, she has whatever culture, we could just skip over it and move on. But no, they really delved deep into the character and made the religious beliefs and like the culture and whatnot a part of the character in a way that makes the culture an important part of the character, which is good. You know, they were doing that in Moon Knight with the Egyptian mythology, and that was really cool. And now they're doing it with Ms. Marvel, and that's also going to be really cool. So I like how Marvel's exploring real-world things in a fictional way, you know? Which was also my favorite part about Eternals, which was how they were going into the past and going to real historic events, but putting a nice little MCU spin on it, where it turns out that something strange happened there. But anyways, Kamala gets the whole plan of the clandestine, or the djinn, they call themselves the clandestine, but they're often referred to other names such as the Jinn, which is like a bad figure in the religion, and there's other interpretations of jinn in other religions. Sometimes they're portrayed as being genies. Genies are a type of jinn. And yeah, that part. And then eventually Kamala starts to realize that they are an interdimensional being from another realm. This seems to be a common theme in Phase 4, where they're exploring other realms. Like in Moon Knight, they went to the Field of Reeds and that Mind Palace place, which is basically an ancestral plane similar to that of the ancestral plane in Black Panther. And it's kind of exploring how in universes there's these weird places that they're going to call realms, where they're kind of like in another dimension. They don't always follow the same laws of physics. They are often very weird. They are kind of fused in with our own universe, and there's very strange, very weird, and interesting ways of accessing these realms. And you can't access the realms in any traditional sense. You have to do it in the strange way that enables you to access it, such as in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. It is a magical portal that is in the form of that car ride through that path through that like big like field in which like it was closing in on them in some sort of weird maze. That was a weird non-traditional way of entering a place. In Moon Knight, it's all about your mentality and your beliefs, in which then after your physical form dies, your energy gets sent to that realm in some weird way. And in the Nord dimension, which is the dimension that gets introduced in this series, there is also a weird way of entering it. It's still not really clear in this show what it is, but it has something to do with the bangle and the powers. This show ends with a nice little like cliffhanger where in the well, first off, they get to the wedding, and then the clandestines start to attack. Kamran tries to go in and warn Kamala and try and get everyone out of there, because the clandestines are dangerous, and they kind of want to kill everybody to get their way. They're kind of brutal in that sense. And this is where some of the weird editing happens in that scene in the wedding room, when Kamran comes in and he says stuff. That is the scene in which there is an obvious ADR in which they replaced one of the words, and then the fight scene that happens is very weird and very strange, because there's no real reason for the fight scene. I don't really feel any reason why they're fighting Kamala. Like, it just kind of it kind of has this hollow feel in the fight scene, where they just kind of pull random weapons out of like places, and that never gets explained. Like it felt like in the introduction scene, they should have had a thing where they introduced themselves and they showed who they are and what they could do, but they didn't really do that all that much. They just had that strange introduction at the beginning of the episode, in which it turned into a disagreement between the two characters, and then it kind of gets confusing in this fight scene. But anyways, the episode ends off with another person figuring out her powers. I can't remember the person's name in the show, but and then that kind of leaves them confused and slightly angry, since they're kind of also best friends, and that they should, and that she should have told her, because they're kind of close in that way, and but yeah, that episode was also really good. I liked the culture and the just like the fun going into the superpowers in that episode. That this one has a slightly more serious tone. Also, the DODC comes in and crashes the hotel and capture the clandestines. But yeah, so far it's really good. I'm hyped up, because at this point in the show, it leaves up this nice air of mystery, At the end, you get the call of the grandmother wanting to go to Pakistan, or wanting them to go to Pakistan to visit her, so that way she can explain the powers, because during the fight, she has a vision of a train, Kamala, and then the grandmother somehow also has a vision of the train at the exact same moment, which is the story that they tell about how when they were going to America and they're trying to board the train, how one of the kids lost their the grandmother lost her way, and then found her way back with a star of lights, which is presumed to be the person that didn't make it back in time. This person, the grandmother's mother. And so that's why when she sees the train, she realizes that something must be happening. The grandmother realizes something must be happening, and then she contacts the granddaughter, or Kamala, and calls her to go to Pakistan, and which leads to episode 4. This is a fun episode. To me, I felt like this episode should have been a little bit longer in the middle. Obviously, the end point is the end of the episode, but in the middle, I think it would have been better if they expanded the runtime and allowed for a little bit more detail in the culture and whatnot. I felt that it would have been really good in that way if they did that, because the rest of the show, episodes 1, 2, and 3 so far, has delved really deep into the culture really well, just on that nice, on a really, really good level. You go to the mosque, you see you get to see some religious festivals, and it's really, and you get to see some family history and all of that, and it's really nice and cool to see all of that. But now you're going into the 4th episode, and I feel it's kind of all condensed a little bit. You get some nice moments where they just kind of talk, and it's fun, but then you go into the thick of the plot of it, where where she meets the Red Dagger Society with the masks, and they show how the dimensions overlap, and that is really cool. But then that kind of abruptly ends, where somehow, and this is the weirdest part of the show, I don't know how this happens, but somehow the clandestines escape the DODC, something that is supposedly supposed to hold the Abomination in the She-Hulk show. Somehow these guys are somehow able to escape, and in a very, very short amount of time, go from all the way from wherever the DODC facility is, presumably in America, since that is where Jennifer Walters is, and since it's a seemingly American organization, considering that this was started by Tony Stark, and somehow go from that facility to Pakistan. And how they knew they were going to Pakistan in the first place, I'm not really sure. It's kind of confusing because they're just kind of there. And the action scene is great. It's a fun action scene, and it's a really well shot action scene. It's just that all the detail around it, you're just kind of like, what is happening? I don't get it. And that's kind of the part of the show that kind of loses me. I really wish that they kind of fleshed that part out. And I bet you it was fleshed out, but for some reason they cut it down in a weird way. And I'll explain what I mean at the end. I have a little bit of a theory of what has happened, but I will explain with the final thing. But anywho, on to the next episode, because the 4th episode ends with a fight and then ends with the Bengal getting hit, and then she gets seemingly sent into like another dimension, and then all of a sudden she's in the past, back in the 40s or whatever, and her ancestors are getting on to the train, and you get to go to that back in time, and it leaves it off as at a nice cliffhanger. Presumably, at least what I was presuming, was that the 5th episode would explain all the confusion that we'd had so far, and it would be kind of like the yes, this is how it all is episode. You know, like the first 3 episodes are really great in doing exposition in a natural way, but for some reason, these episodes, the exposition is very strange, you know? The 5th episode especially, where you barely get anything out of it. Like, you're spending the whole first 3 episodes being like, oh, what's going on? You finally get to the episode in which they have a cool fight scene and a brief talking scene with the Red Dagger Society. And then it's just the 5th episode where, honestly, like the beginning part where they go back into the past and you see the history because the ancestor was in fact one of the clandestine. She broke apart from them and started to have a family with one of the people on Earth in Pakistan. And their daughter is the grandmother of the series, and then they go through this very nice section in which they go and give you pretty much a history lesson on the history of Pakistan at this time, and how like the British Empire had taken over, and all of that sort of stuff going on, and then they go through the history and whatnot. And that is all really, really good, and it's really informational, and at some points like very like serious, and it's one of my favorite parts of the show because it really goes into the culture. But then they reveal that the dimension that she goes back into with the Bengal is it turns out she went back in time, and the trail of lights was actually her hard light powers that she made. She made a disc, and then that disc broke off and made a trail of stars and led the grandmother back to her father, in which the mother wasn't able to make it because she got stabbed. And I don't know. It's just that the show didn't like if the show had any sort of like hint at Destiny being a play in the show at all, it would have made more sense. But they never mention Destiny or any of that type of stuff, or they don't really enforce that you have this grand path type thing. And so when it happens, you're just kind of like, what? And like And then also I was kind of confused with the logic of it, because the fact that it's a time loop, does that break Marvel's like time travel rules again? And if you you can try and think about it, and you might come up with the answer of like, oh, she's traveling through a dimension, which is why she's able to go back in time. Maybe dimensions such as the quantum realm, which is also another realm similar to the Nor dimension or realm. It has a way of bending time and not sitting within the laws of space and time. Maybe she's able to use that to go back into the past. Yeah, that's fine, but what about the time loop thing? That doesn't really make any sense to me. Unless you're saying that it is possible to program a time loop into the reality. And I guess it is possible. In Doctor Strange, Mordo does mention that the first Doctor Strange, Mordo at one point mentions that all the consequences of doing time travel, and one of them is time loops. So maybe since if you're in a time loop, you would be having the same consciousness in which you go back in time, and then you have the ability to change anything. Maybe there's a way to orchestrate certain time maneuvers in order to make this sort of situation possible. But even then, you're trying to stretch the rules for something that the show doesn't really give you an explanation for. Like, it's not even on the levels where, oh, they hint at it and you just have to figure it out the rest of the way. It's to the point where they don't give you anything, and you're just kind of left like, huh? And now all the nerd channels have to deal with trying to figure out what happened. And I feel that maybe the editing and whatever they did to change the editing is probably what affected that. But anywho, after that point, they have this confrontation with the clandestines, the main clandestine leader, and eventually, and basically the Bengal somehow tears a hole in reality, and they try to use that energy. They try to step through the portal, in which the first person does it, and then they turn into this rock-like thing, and then crumble to the ground in a skeleton. And then the mother, or the clandestine, the mother of Carmen, steps into it, but then releases her energy to be soared back to Cameron to protect Cameron and give him superpowers similar to how he gets powers in the comics, except, of course, a different origin of how he gets the powers. But nonetheless, they give him similar looking powers to what he has in the comics, which, good. That scene was a little confusing and could have been done a little bit better, but once you get, that one is a little bit less bad as the time travel. But overall, that episode was very strange. Episode 5, very strange episode. That one is probably my least favorite, and the one that kind of brought me out of the series a little bit, But season 6, or not, episode 6, it goes right back to the first 3 episodes and how great those were, and you go right back, and it's better than ever because she's back. She has her superpowers. Over the course of the series, she had developed her costume, in which then she can fight the DODC, since that's the only bad guys left, and in the 5th episode, and also from like the 5th episode, that one kind of felt kind of weird, because it almost felt like it was the end of the show. They kind of had that feel towards it, but this one was a lot more like, yes, this is the end of the story. Like, you're not left thinking, what? In a bad way, In the end, they do leave you on like a cliffhanger, but it's more like a, and they do it in a really good, clever way, It's obvious that that 5th episode and possibly that 4th episode, or the episodes in which, like, they obviously cut something down, you know? But anywho, this episode's great. All the members team up in the high school, and they do this crazy plot and plan to stop the DODC from capturing them. One of the members goes rogue and starts attacking the high school, which is bad press for the DODC. She has been portrayed as being the more villainous in the DODC for most of the series, in terms of how she is very racist throughout the show, using improper terms for things and being very, very, like, bad in a, like, cultural and like racial sense. Like, it's kind of cringy, but it's supposed to be cringy. You're supposed to be kind of like, oh, this person's working for the DODC? Huh. These aren't really good people, you know? But in general, they aren't really good people. But she's like the bad, in which she goes rogue, sends them after these kids. Great fight. Ms. Marvel says the word embiggen. She embiggens her hand and arms and limbs in like a crystalline way. And that's great, because if she didn't say embiggen in this series, that would have been pretty disappointing, since that is pretty much her catchphrase. Like she invented that word practically. That's like one of the things she's known for, one of the fun things about her comics. So good on them for making that good decision. And then the battle's over. They win. Still some questions with the DODC that you're kind of like, huh, what's going on? Which is obviously pushing into She-Hulk, since she's going to be working at the judicial branch of the DODC and doing court cases and all of that. But then the episode ends with Bruno going off to college, since he had that scholarship at the beginning of the show that he had and wasn't sure what to decide of that. And then he decides to go do things for himself, you know? Not be afraid to, like, leave his friends behind and, like, be smart, because he's really intelligent. And in fact, he created all these cool things for Kamala, Ms. Marvel. Absolutely great. And then, one thing is, she gets her name in this final episode in a very great way. The father starts to go over the meaning of the word Kamala as her name, and it means perfect, but also it means marvel, which that was a terrific scene. Really great. It makes you really appreciate the dad character a lot, and the costume that they make for her, the traditional Ms. Marvel costume, that was made by her parents, similar to how they made the Hulk costume. They also make this costume, and it turns out that they knew she had superpowers this whole time, really, like her whole family, and they're all just accepting of it. You know? Like, the mother was surprised in the 5th episode, but, you know, she eventually told the rest of the family, and they were all very supportive of it. They weren't angry with her being an Avenger, they just didn't like Captain Marvel as a role model, because she isn't the best role model. Because if you watch the Captain Marvel movie, she is kind of a jerk. That's kind of the point. I know some people didn't really like Captain Marvel because of the personality of the character, but that's one of the things about the character. She's kind of a jerk. She's kind of not a good role model in that way. That's part of the character, at least in Marvel's way of doing it. You know? And they're continuing with that. They're keeping her as being as being not the best role model, but still kind of like a good person. All right. So as Bruno is about to drive off to college, this is kind of like the end stinger, not the end credit scene, but kind of like the thing before the credits, in which then he goes out of the car and he's like, "Oh, I looked into your DNA. It has there's something weird about your DNA. It's almost like there is a mutation." And then the 90s X-Men theme plays in the background, similar to how that happened when Professor Xavier appeared in Doctor Strange, where it goes like, da na 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 na. Except, whereas in Doctor Strange it went as the classic little jingle, da na 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 na, da na 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 na. And this one, they do a more melodic version of it, where it's like, da na 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 na, which is really cool, and is obviously hinting at her being an X-Men. And this is the point where I have to point out that in the comics, she is originally an Inhuman. Inhumans are different than X-Men. Inhumans come from Kree. They have one of their processes involves having a crystal structure go around them in which they transform, similar to metamorphosis into a superpowered being. They are a hybrid between alien and human, making them an Inhuman. They're not human. They're a hybrid creature. Whereas X-Men are a mutated human, which makes them still human. But in the show, what I am guessing is that originally they were going to have her be an Inhuman, which all the clues pointed to it. The fact that the bangle came off of a Kree, which is the people that Inhumans are a hybrid of. The fact that the person of the clandestines that separated and became the great-grandmother of the family, she came from that alternate dimension, which would then also forward the thinking of it being a hybrid species, which would explain why the family has such a strange history, and has that, and it would be that they are hybrids. That would have made sense. The fact that, all of that stuff combined, and all the weird stuff with the crystal structure and whatnot, makes sense for her to be an Inhuman. But what I'm guessing is at the last minute, they decided that it would be better if they got people excited about her by hinting that she is a mutant. So that way, people could get excited about her by, hey, they're bringing X-Men into the MCU, and then later they can bring in the Inhumans if they want. But changing it from Inhumans to mutants just make the whole thing more confusing. If at the end they went, she's an Inhuman, then all the details in the center would have made sense. And I'm guessing the editing was to cut out anything that mentioned Inhumans and anything that hinted at that explicitly. But all those little pieces add up to Inhuman, so for it to be mutants at the end, you're just kind of like, what? That came out of nowhere. And good, she's a mutant, that's great. That's fine, but they had Inhumans right there. They have already introduced Inhumans in Marvel. In Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, Black Bolt is sitting right in the Illuminati, and they say, Blackagar Boltagon, the leader of the Inhumans. And they even use his ridiculous name, Blackagar Boltagon, which is his real name in the comics. So that means his superhero name is technically just a nickname of shortening his name to Black Bolt, which for a superhero name, that's kind of a lame one, if considering that his superhero name is literally just shortening his own name. And even the naming convention would have matched with how Kamala is naming her superhero name after the definition of the word Kamala. that would at least follow in the same name scheming pattern. They had all these things pointing towards Inhumans, but yet they went towards mutants. And that kind of screwed up everything. That's my big prediction for what happened with the middle of the show. But, over with that, the majority of the show is very good. There's plenty of good things about the show. The high school stuff, anything that takes place in the New Jersey area. The 4th episode was good in the beginning with going through Pakistan and having that, cool experience. The 5th episode is also good in the beginning when they give the history of Pakistan and then the history of the great-grandmother character and their journey up until the time travel bit. And those are all really good. The score is great. The characters are great. The culture is great. The story overall is great. So overall, this is a very great show. And finally, the post-credits singer, she gets a weird buzzing of the gauntlet, and then all of a sudden, she steps out of her bed, and then she gets hit by this weird, ribbony thing. Like she gets turned into ribbons or something. And then she gets gets blasted into her closet, in which up comes Captain Marvel, which is great. It's absolutely a great scene, and you're kind of like, what's going on? So basically, what happened is Captain Marvel and Ms. Marvel somehow swapped places. And this is kind of a creative way of introducing it, because they could have just had a cameo, and it could have been really forced of, her coming down and being like, I heard you're a super fan of me. You want to join with me? That would have been really boring and really lame. And even if they did that scene good, it would have still been a copy out of how they normally do those types of scenes. But now, you got kind of the driving force of the new The Marvels movies that's coming out soon. And it kind of has the inciting incident for that movie where it's like somehow they swapped places. What happened there? So that kind of is a very good way to do things. So yeah, that is my review of Ms. Marvel. Great show. 10 out of 10, except for the middle part and the editing in the middle. 10 out of 10. Those episodes are not good, but the rest of the episodes are really good. I can't wait to see what goes on next with the show. And honestly, next with Phase 4, since we are pretty much halfway through all of Phase 4, this has been all a setup. There's probably going to be a conclusion by the end of this. And yeah, we got a lot of stuff more to go. We got second seasons of Loki and What If. They are both supposed to have a major impact on things. You got the movies, a bunch of those, and all the rest of the TV shows. There's a Halloween special coming out. That's going to be insane. She-Hulk is the one that's coming up closest to now. And actually, right now, we are in the biggest gap between television shows in Marvel properties. Because we had Doctor Strange, Ms. Marvel, in the middle, Thor came out, and then it ends, but now we have this break. And now, but the exciting part about this break is next Thursday. This day, next week, is Comic-Con, and Marvel is going to have a panel there, which means that they are probably going to make some more great announcements, maybe even some trailers for the upcoming movies, which is going to be very exciting. And yeah, great things to look up to ahead. Can't wait for the She-Hulk show. That one looks absolutely hilarious. And yeah, great show. Watch Ms. Marvel, and thank you for watching this review, and thank you for watching The Plaid Lad. Blue Plaid out.